Imagine waking up one day and realizing that most of what you believe, what you repeat, and even what you defend with passion was never truly your own thought. Imagine discovering that the opinions you hold most tightly were not born from deep reflection, but from mindless repetition. This revelation strikes at the core of our identity, challenging everything we thought we knew about ourselves. The uncomfortable truth emerges like a specter from the shadows of our consciousness. We have been intellectual sleepwalkers, convinced of our wakefulness while dreaming thoughts planted by others. This is the silent tragedy unfolding across our modern landscape, the grand illusion of independent thinking without ever truly engaging our critical faculties. We nod in agreement, we share, we argue passionately. Yet how often do we pause to ask, is this truly what I believe, or merely what I've been conditioned to accept? Today, we embark on a journey into one of the most profound questions of our time. Why has critical thinking become so rare in our society? This isn't merely an academic inquiry, it is an exploration that may fundamentally alter how you perceive yourself and the world around you. To guide us through this labyrinth, we'll examine George Orwell's brilliant allegory, Animal Farm, a story that, beneath its seemingly simple surface, reveals not just the corruption of power, but the gradual, almost imperceptible death of independent thought. The animal's journey from liberation to new chains mirrors our own intellectual imprisonment, offering us a disturbing reflection of how easily minds can be captured. I urge you to stay with me until the very end, for the final insight may be the most transformative revelation that could forever change how you navigate the sea of information that surrounds you daily. This isn't hyperbole. It's a promise that once you see the mechanisms of thought control, you can never unsee them again. Before we dive deeper, if you find yourself drawn to exploring the hidden truths of human psychology, the subtle patterns of social influence, and the philosophical questions that shape our existence, consider this your invitation to a community of awakening minds. Your engagement matters not just as validation, but as proof that the spark of genuine curiosity still burns in a world designed to extinguish it. This journey isn't merely informative, it's transformative. We're not just accumulating facts, we're cultivating awareness. In a world that rewards conformity with comfort and punishes questioning with isolation, the act of thinking critically has become nothing less than an act of rebellion, quiet, personal, yet profoundly powerful. Now reflect for a moment. When was the last time you questioned a deeply held belief, not because someone challenged you, but because something within you sensed a dissonance between what you claim to know and what might actually be true? For many, such moments of genuine self-examination have become increasingly rare, replaced by the comfortable certainty of borrowed convictions. Orwell foresaw this intellectual stagnation decades before social media algorithms and digital echo chambers perfected the art of mental confinement. Through Animal Farm, he crafted a warning, so prescient it feels as though he glimpsed our present from his past, showing how a society can surrender its capacity for independent thought until obedience feels indistinguishable from wisdom. What happens when we stop questioning? What withers within us when we outsource our thinking to others? The consequences extend far beyond personal integrity. They reach into the very foundations of freedom itself. At first glance, Animal Farm appears to be a simple tale of animals overthrowing human oppression. But beneath this accessible narrative lies one of the most penetrating examinations of how minds are captured not through force, but through language and repetition. The animals begin with noble ideals: freedom, equality, justice, principles that resonate in their hearts as true and good. But watch carefully what happens next. Gradually, imperceptibly, the pigs begin reshaping these ideals, altering the commandments one subtle word at a time. The animals, busy with daily survival, barely notice as no animal shall sleep in a bed transforms into no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. Each modification seems small, reasonable even, yet together they construct an entirely new reality. This process mirrors what unfolds in our information landscape daily. Our perceptions are shaped not primarily through violence or obvious coercion, but through the gentle, persistent pressure of repeated messages. As Orwell himself wrote, if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. This reciprocal relationship between words and understanding forms the foundation of all influence. Consider how this manifests in your own life. When did you last encounter a headline that provoked immediate emotional reaction? Did you pause to examine the framing, to question why certain words were chosen over others? Or did you absorb both the information and the emotional packaging as a single unit of truth? The speed at which information now travels has far outpaced our capacity for deep understanding. We consume fragments without context, headlines without substance, conclusions without premises. We are information-rich but wisdom-poor, drowning in data while starving for meaning. Like the animals on the farm, we find ourselves surrounded by noise that drowns out the quiet voice of our own reasoning. The animals were promised equality, justice, and progress, words that stirred their hearts and mobilized their actions. Yet gradually, these words were hollowed out, their meanings twisted until they became tools of the very oppression they were meant to prevent. All animals are equal, declared the pigs, but some animals are more equal than others. This masterful distortion exemplifies how language can be weaponized against thought itself. Today, this same pattern of linguistic manipulation permeates our discourse. Political slogans, corporate value statements, social movements all employ powerful words that resonate emotionally, while often concealing contradictions that critical examination would reveal. We find ourselves defending phrases and concepts we've barely examined, fighting passionately for ideas we've inherited rather than developed. Psychologists like Eric Fromm and Carl Jung recognized this tendency decades ago. Fromm described the escape from freedom, the uncomfortable reality that many people unconsciously surrender their intellectual autonomy when the burden of independent thinking becomes too heavy. Jung observed that societies often prefer collective illusions to individual truths because individuality demands responsibility that many find overwhelming. Critical thinking isn't comfortable, it requires constant vigilance, the willingness to question even our most cherished beliefs, and the courage to stand apart when necessary. It demands that we tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity in a world that sells simple answers to complex questions. Is it any wonder, then, that many choose the easier path of intellectual conformity disguised as understanding? But here lies the danger that Orwell so clearly foresaw. When we abdicate our responsibility to think critically, we create a vacuum that something or someone will inevitably fill. Nature abhors emptiness, and minds are no exception. Whether it's a charismatic leader, a dominant ideology, a media narrative, or an algorithm designed to maximize engagement, something is always waiting to shape our thoughts when we neglect to shape them ourselves. This is what Orwell meant when he described propaganda not as a flood of obvious falsehoods, but as the slow erosion of the capacity to distinguish truth from manipulation. When truth becomes relative, when facts become matters of opinion, control becomes invisible because we no longer recognize the boundaries being crossed. Think of the animals again. They didn't lose their freedom overnight in a single dramatic moment. It happened through small, gradual changes, each seemingly reasonable in isolation. The rules were rewritten, memories reshaped, history revised, until the animals could no longer recognize the difference between their former oppressors and their supposed liberators. By the story's end, looking through the farmhouse window, they cannot distinguish between the pigs and the humans they had once rebelled against. Isn't this what happens in our modern systems as well? We create new hierarchies, new authorities, new digital shepherds who guide our attention and shape our perceptions. Slowly, imperceptibly, we forget what intellectual freedom actually felt like. We mistake the comfortable boundaries of our information bubbles for the horizons of reality itself. This, perhaps, is Orwell's most haunting insight. Tyranny begins not with violence, but with intellectual surrender. A population that has forgotten how to question becomes easy to rule. A mind that no longer doubts becomes easy to deceive. And a person who has outsourced their thinking becomes, without realizing it, a component in the very machinery that constrains them. But there is hope in this recognition. For if the death of critical thinking happens gradually, might not its rebirth begin the same way? With awareness, with the simple act of pausing before accepting, with the courage to ask why when others simply nod. In a world increasingly engineered to capture and direct our attention, the act of thinking deeply, of refusing the easy answers and comfortable certainties, has become perhaps the most radical act available to us. Not a dramatic revolution, but a quiet reclamation of our most human capacity. Stay with me, because in the next part we'll explore how Animal Farm reveals not just the mechanisms of external control, but the psychological forces that make us susceptible to manipulation, and what this teaches us about our own inner nature. The most dangerous chains, we'll discover, are often those we cannot see. If Animal Farm teaches us anything, it is that control is rarely imposed purely by force, it is accepted through belief. The animals did not remain enslaved because of physical chains or constant whips. They stayed that way because they came to believe the new system was better than the old one, or at least necessary. That's how every form of manipulation begins, not through domination, but through persuasion. And persuasion begins in the mind. Our modern society mirrors this pattern with frightening precision. Instead of physical control, We are shaped by psychological conditioning, subtle, nearly invisible forces that influence our desires, fears, and even our sense of identity. The philosopher Michel Foucault described this as soft power, the kind that doesn't need violence because it makes people willingly conform to its demands. Orwell showed it through the pig's speeches and slogans. Foucault revealed it through the invisible systems of modern institutions. Different times, same principle, obedience disguised as choice. Consider how information reaches you today. Every headline, post, and comment competes for your limited attention. Sophisticated algorithms learn what triggers your engagement, what makes you angry, what makes you nod in agreement, what keeps you scrolling, and then feed you more of the same. This creates a perfectly designed illusion of truth where everything you encounter seems to confirm what you already believe. When everything you see validates your existing worldview, you mistake this artificial comfort for clarity of thought. This is precisely how critical thinking atrophies, not through conflict, but through comfort. In Animal Farm, the animals slowly forget their original commandments as the pigs modify them one by one, erasing and rewriting until the truth becomes unrecognizable. No animal shall sleep in a bed, they once agreed, but later the rule quietly changes to no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. Each distortion feels small, harmless, even reasonable, but together they construct an entirely new reality. Doesn't this echo how modern discourse redefines language? How truth becomes a matter of narrative rather than correspondence with reality? How freedom becomes a brand rather than a lived experience? We find ourselves defending definitions we didn't create and repeating phrases whose origins we've never examined. Psychologist Jordan Peterson observed that the price of freedom is the ability to bear responsibility. This captures the essence of critical thought. It requires the courage to face discomfort, to question our biases, and to accept that our most cherished opinions might be wrong. But most people, as Carl Jung noted, fear the unknown within themselves more than the tyranny outside. They prefer the security of collective thinking, the comforting illusion that if everyone around them believes something, it must be true. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you truly think for yourself? When you share an opinion online, whose voice are you really echoing? Is it genuinely yours, born from careful reflection and examination of evidence? Or is it the voice of a group that shaped your thoughts long before you expressed them? Orwell's farm animals believed they were free thinkers until their very language was rewritten to prevent them from thinking otherwise. This is why Orwell's work remains so prophetic. He understood that the most effective form of control is not to silence speech, but to shape the language that makes certain thoughts possible or impossible. When language becomes limited, thought follows. If you can only speak in approved terms, you can only think approved thoughts. In our digital era, censorship has evolved beyond political suppression into psychological self-regulation. People censor themselves to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid being cancelled or excluded. The farm no longer needs physical fences, because the boundaries now exist within our minds, invisible lines we dare not cross, for fear of social punishment. There is a concept in psychology called groupthink, a state where the desire for harmony in a group leads to irrational decisions. People suppress their doubts to maintain unity, even when the truth is staring them in the face. That's what happened on the farm when the animals watched their leaders betray every promise, yet continued to cheer and support them. Today it happens when we see contradictions in our systems, our politics, our cultures, and yet prefer silence to the discomfort of speaking up, because deep down, many fear that thinking differently means standing alone. But here is the paradox that Orwell understood so well. True unity only comes from individuals who think freely. Conformity may create order, but only individuality creates meaning. The animals on the farm lost their individuality the moment they stopped questioning. They began to work harder, sing the same songs, repeat the same phrases, and believe the same lies until their rebellion became indistinguishable from their oppression. Modern society celebrates rebellion, but only within safe boundaries. We're encouraged to think different, as long as our difference fits within acceptable parameters. We're told to question everything but not too deeply. We're praised for uniqueness as long as our uniqueness can be categorized, marketed, and monetized. Orwell's message cuts through this hypocrisy like a blade. He reminds us that real rebellion begins when you stop repeating and start reflecting. When you dare to step outside the comfortable boundaries of approved thought and ask the questions no one else is asking. Let's pause and consider. Why does thinking critically feel so difficult today? Because we are bombarded with more information than ever before, yet less meaning. As philosopher Jean Baudrillard warned, We live in a world of simulations where signs and symbols have replaced reality itself. We don't just consume news, we consume interpretations of news. We don't just learn facts, we absorb narratives wrapped in emotion. And every time we react, without reflection, we become more predictable, more programmable, more like the animals Orwell described: busy, obedient, and unaware. But it's not hopeless. Awareness is the first form of resistance. The moment you start asking who benefits from what I believe, you begin to break the illusion. Because the one thing power fears most is not violence, it is clarity. The clear mind sees manipulation for what it is, and no system can control someone who understands how control works. In the next part, we'll go even deeper, exploring why the human mind is so easily manipulated, how fear, desire, and the need for belonging make us surrender our ability to think independently. We'll see how Orwell's warning is not just political, but deeply psychological. The greatest battle for critical thought is not fought in parliaments or protest marches, it is waged within each of us, every day, with every piece of information we encounter. Think for a moment about what truly controls people. It's not always power, money, or authority, it's fear. Fear of exclusion, fear of being wrong, fear of standing alone. This is the hidden engine behind conformity, the invisible force that makes intelligent people surrender their judgment to the crowd. George Orwell understood the psychological reality profoundly. In Animal Farm, the animals obey not only because they are deceived, but because they are afraid of the return of the humans, afraid of punishment, afraid of uncertainty. Their fear becomes the perfect tool of control, more effective than any whip or chain could ever be. In our modern world, fear has simply changed its disguise. Today we fear being irrelevant, unheard, or disconnected. We fear judgment from others and rejection from our peers. Social media has transformed these ancient human anxieties into daily rituals of validation. Each like, each comment becomes a small approval from the collective that whispers, "You belong." But belonging comes at a cost, the gradual surrender of individuality. Psychologist Abraham Maslow wrote that belonging is one of our deepest human needs. But when that need dominates truth, we lose authenticity. And a society that sacrifices authenticity for acceptance is one step away from intellectual slavery. This is why modern influence campaigns are not just political, they're emotional. They don't simply tell you what to think. They make you feel something so strongly that you stop questioning altogether. The animals in Orwell's story did not obey because they loved lies, but because they loved the feeling of belonging. They sang the farm's anthem, celebrated the pigs' victories, and believed the stories told to them because it gave their suffering meaning. The more they believed, the more their chains disappeared in their minds. The tragedy wasn't that they were oppressed, it was that they no longer recognized their oppression. This is the tragedy of our time as well. The more emotionally charged our information environment becomes, the less room we have for rational thought. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio proved that emotion is essential for decision-making. But when emotion overwhelms logic, it blinds judgment. Modern media thrives on this imbalance: outrage, fear, envy, pride, each emotion used to divide, distract, and dominate. A mind controlled by emotion is easier to steer than one guided by reason. So ask yourself, when you encounter information online that makes you angry, do you stop to analyze it? Or do you instantly react? Do you question the source? Or do you share it? To express your identity, every time we react before we reflect, someone else gains.